Welcome to Governance with Gimmal, a podcast where we connect industry experts, technology partners, and thought leaders with listeners to share their insight on current market drivers and trends around information governance. I'm your host, Shana Horka, and I'm joined by our guest speaker, Dean Misenhimer, to share his expertise on a new era of digital transformation. Hi, Dean. Thank you for joining us. I am excited to kick off our first ever episode of Gimmal's podcast, Governance with Gimmal. I think our topic today will certainly resonate with most listeners, and that is the topic of digital transformations. This is certainly not a new concept, and it may even sound a bit like a buzzword to some, but as technology and the market evolves, this is certainly a topic of conversations with most organizations that we speak with regularly, especially when planning their 2022 goals and strategies. With conversations with our own clients and through industry analyst reports, we're seeing a lot of organizations from a variety of different industries allocate funds and resources towards a bucket broadly named digital transformation. In this episode, we're going to speak to this topic from an information governance lens so you can better understand what this may mean for your own organization. And who better to speak to the audience than our own expert, Dean Misenhimer, who has been in the industry for quite some time. Dean, for those who may not be familiar with you or your name, can you just start off with a short introduction and your background?
Sure. My name's Dean Misenhimer. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering at Gimmal. As Shana said, I've been in and around the industry that started as document management. I've been involved with it since the early 90s, all the way through the different transformations of the technology to kind of where we're at today. So 30 years of content management, records management, information governance background with a number of different companies selling to a variety of different vertical markets.
Great. And I talked a bit about the concept of digital transformations as a buzzword, but I think that's because so many people hear it and they can't truly grasp what it means for them. And obviously, we know that it's probably going to mean something different for different organizations, but I want to start with the history there. So in terms of information governance, what is the history and kind of the pace of change?
Okay. Yeah. So digital transformation, if you look at kind of let's call it the formal definition from the Gartners or Forresters of the world, it's the process of exploiting digital technologies and its supporting capabilities to create a digital business model, right? That's kind of the formal definition of digital transformation. As I mentioned earlier, it started way back in the day with just document management, making documents electronic, putting them in a repository with a little bit of metadata and being able to track versions and things. And as technologies developed, as the web came about, web content management appeared on the horizon and digital asset management appeared on the horizon, and records management's always kind of been out there. And there was a point in time where all of these things came together and enterprise content management became a concept where there's single common platform to provide all of these services under a common repository. And from there, it went from content management, which was still a bit of a silo in a way, to content services, which became more of a concept of we have this centralized set of services, but now creating the web services and the API layers to be able to access those services from other applications, whether it's ERP or CRM or any business application that needed content services. And then from there, that's where we've kind of moved now to digital transformation, which is that next stage of not just expose kind of content services to other apps, but really use the set of services and these capabilities to transform how business is being done. Because, talking about the shift in technology, everybody kind of has an expectation now of being able to find the information that you want in pretty short demand. We've been spoiled by our cell phones. You can pick your phone up, say a sentence into it, and get more information than you ever thought you could about the topic. And we want that not just in our personal lives, but in our business lives as well. The cloud has helped to accelerate a lot of that. Companies are looking at how they can do things like now incorporate mobile devices, apps, other things into the digital transformation to access the back-end services. It's really that next phase of the transformation process, making business easier to do. There are some things out there that are helping to drive that as well. And then we'll talk more about those around governance and around getting rid of paper and things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I know in my personal experience, I mean, searching something and having that quick at my fingertips is certainly what I prefer. But when I speak to users, not necessarily like top down or C-level executives, but the actual people who this is substantially impacting, there's definitely hesitation there. Why do you think that is? What is the scare behind moving into this, what most people hear as digital transformations might mean something different to every organization, but what's the hesitation there?
Fear of change is one thing, right? Anytime there's a significant change, change management's a key part of any initiative, whether it's digital transformation or anything else, making sure your users embrace the change, that you show them how it's going to benefit them, and you show them some quick wins so that they embrace the change, right? That's key to any project. I think some of the hesitation may just be a concern about loss of control or access to the information. Am I still going to have access to the information I need, or can I still be able to get to what I need and do my job? So I think, that's part of it. Paper, right? One of the things that's pushing change are initiatives like in government with M1921 to get away from paper and make everything digital. And there are deadlines in place as to when that has to be done. A lot of people still like paper. As I said, I've been in this industry for almost 30 years. There are times I still want a piece of paper in front of me to be able to reference or do something. But, from a record standpoint, from an accessibility standpoint, the less paper there is, the better. Sometimes people don't want to give up that paper, or they'll make the initiative to digitize all their paper, but they don't want to dispose of the paper records and just keep the digital ones, right? So again, kind of embracing that change and figuring out how to drive that change. And then some of the other things are around the regulatory challenges, the privacy laws that have all come into place over the last few years. GDPR, I think everyone's aware of. That was really the first big one that everybody had to respond to and react to. Now there are state level, at least in the United States, there are state level laws like CCPA in California. I know 2 or 3 other states have already passed laws. The majority of states actually have initiatives in place to pass laws. So there are personal privacy laws where Dean can request all of his information to be removed by Gimmal that is not directly related to a business transaction, and Gimmal has to respond to that. So if I make all this information digital, how do I manage that? How do I respond to those types of requests? Right. And then sometimes the hesitancy is just not knowing where to start. When you look at the volume of information that may need to be made digital or may need to be migrated and consolidated, it can literally be tens of terabytes in some cases, especially with file shares or with SharePoint environments or other systems. Where do you begin? With the cleanup, with the rot mitigation, getting rid of the redundant, obsolete, trivial information, and doing that migration. Sometimes it's just hard to get that first step going on the initiative because of that, because it's like, I don't even know where to begin.
Right, and that makes sense. And I think an important thing that you're kind of hinting at as well is you talked a little bit about M1921 is leading from a records management standpoint, paper to electronic record keeping. Is it safe to say that they're setting the standard, right? So whether you're scared of it or not, it's coming regardless. What would you recommend or what would you say to that as being a driver?
It definitely has been a driver. And interestingly, as systems began to move to the cloud, as platforms like Microsoft 365 took hold and really became broadly used across both industry and government, it was funny from a records management standpoint, which is where obviously, Gimmel's focus has been for a number of years. One of the early adopters of actually moving records to the cloud was government. They were actually moving before private industry in some respects because they didn't have to maintain infrastructure. The services were all centralized, and it provided access to that information for a distributed workforce. They were kind of early adopters of cloud-based records, whereas a lot of private companies, because of security concerns or privacy concerns, were hesitant about putting records in the cloud for a long time. That's all changed, but it was interesting. Government was an early adopter. And M1921 is pushing to really get rid of the paper now and really force everybody to digital.
So, Dean, you talked about a couple of market drivers, but can we speak a little bit more to kind of the trends that you're seeing? And you addressed concerns around change management and the fear there and taking that first big step towards a digital transformation.
Yeah, I think some of the trends we've seen is system consolidation, where people are looking to get off kind of older legacy content management technologies and move to cloud-based solutions, whether that's a box or whether that's Microsoft 365 or others. I think that's an absolute trend we've seen. A lot of folks moving to those platforms as their core platform. We've seen trends of people looking to reduce infrastructure, so move to the cloud to get rid of servers, looking to retire file shares and get information off of file shares. So those have been some of the trends. And I think this has long been underway, but the early payloads that were moving to the cloud were things like email. That was probably the first thing most companies moved to email was Exchange servers and things like that, right, to get those off on-prem. So I think those are some of the trends that we've seen, as well as things like simplifying records management approaches, simplifying their retention schedules, going from multi-hundreds or 1,000 retention categories down to 100 or a couple of hundred or even under 100 in some cases, making it simpler as to how things are, categorized, and looking for ways to automate the governance process, right? Make it a non-disruptive process to the end users where the users can do their job, discovery or retention and disposition. Those things are all just kind of happening in the background, controlled by the information governance team, and not forcing the users to have to take, specific actions to trigger records, for example. So I think those are some of the trends.
In terms of getting started, say an organization is moving towards one of these trends and they kind of see it from a top-down approach of it's going to be more efficient. You're going to put automation in place, but we know as, the users, that's not exactly how it starts off, right? So what is that first step? How do we push them through the door and kind of get the ball rolling on something like this?
Yeah, great question. That first step, or kind of where do I start, is I think first is almost you do an inventory. Where all do we have content that needs to be under information governance policies? And it's not always that obvious. It's not always, all right, we got SharePoint and we got a file share and we have this old ECM platform. What about your email? What about PST files out on your network? What about OneDrive? Do you have cloud systems that you've used, file sharing platforms? Where all might you have content that needs to be analyzed, needs to be looked at, and then needs to be potentially migrated into a more common storage infrastructure where it can be put under retention policy, where it can be ultimately disposed of. So doing an inventory, number one, and just figuring out what do we have out there. And then two, taking a look at, okay, what are our requirements? Is it just simply records retention? Or do we also have things like GDPR or other privacy issues where we need to be able to go out and search and find information because somebody has sent us a request to remove all their information, or we have litigation occasionally and we hit with discovery request and we have to go out and find all of the information across multiple repositories. So do we need file analytic tools? Do we need e-discovery tools that can analyze multiple content sources, our file shares and our repositories and our email and our PST files, even potentially the desktop, right? The desktop level machines. Where's the content? What is it? And then figuring out what's out there. And a real common question we see as people begin to think about just doing records is they have a file share that's been out there for 10 years. Everybody has their S drive or their U drive or their X drive, whatever your company calls it, right? And it's been out there forever, and people have just been creating folder structures out there and putting stuff out there. And a lot of the people who created those folders and put that stuff out there may not be around anymore. And so everybody's afraid to delete stuff because nobody knows what it is. And so over time, this thing has grown into a literally a multi-terabyte content source. And so sometimes step one, before you can even begin to do discovery or records management or migration or anything else, is just analyzing it and seeing what's out there, seeing what the structure is, and do the rot cleanup. Because if I've got 10 or 15 or 20 terabytes of file share content, but 50 or 60% of that is rot and can be just disposed of, or just simply put on very low cost storage for a year and locked down and see if anybody misses it. Now my migration project is much smaller. Now when I need to do discovery or I need to address a privacy request or a FOIA request, it's a much smaller data set to have to deal with. right? So looking for those things you can do to streamline the process a lot of times. And file shares is, quite frankly, is one we've seen has been a big one.
Great. Well, Dean, thank you for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts, maybe some key takeaways for listeners that you want them to take out of this first episode?
Yeah. So in closing, I think the key points I would address are identify some places you can get some quick wins, and that will help your users buy in. Segment the project down into manageable chunks, right? Address file shares first or legacy ECM first. Look for areas where you can generate ROI. If you can retire a legacy solution before you have to renew your maintenance, how much money would that save you? Can that actually fund your digital transformation project? And then try and automate the process as possible. Use software tools for discovery, for file analytics, to automate the records management process.
If you'd like to learn more about strategies for digital transformation, view the related resources below.